Mr. Speaker, as I rise today, Mr. Speaker, to add my contribution to this debate, I first must make some general statements. The Minister of Culture, Youth and Sports, his idea of One Guyana is him using his one set of friends across the ministry with taxpayers' monies. Look at the broadcast of the national concerts, only aired on NCN, NTN, MTV, TVG, HJTV, and E-Networks. All friends and family of the government. In the honorable members' world, there is no HBTV Channel 9, no LRTVS, no HGPTV, no CNS6, and no RBS. He directs where the government's money should go, only to his friends and family, and blacklists those who speak against the government. Honorable member can best be described as a well-dressed failure. He has no policy and surrounds himself with promoters and sports organizers using their hard work to make himself look good. It's really a shame. You see, Mr. Speaker, on that note, it is quite interesting that the government ministers seem so incapable of representing themselves that their chief whip ensure that they speak after their opposition shadows. In any normal parliament, Mr. Speaker, the government ministers would present their vision for the year and what they intend to do with the monies allocated to their ministries, and the opposition shadows would have a chance to respond. Not so in Guyana. If Guyanese take a look at the lineup of speakers, it is clear that the government ministers do not want to speak before their counterparts on our side. Mr. Speaker, I find myself trying to understand the minds of those who believe that the Guyanese people would be happy with the budget that is before us. After reading this budget presentation, Mr. Speaker, there is no way that I can accept this as good enough for the Guyanese people who are currently facing economic and social hardships. Mr. Speaker, the PPP has presented 3 budgets to this Assembly since their installation in 2020. Their 2020 budget read, "Our plan for prosperity, protecting our people in a COVID-19 environment, strengthening democracy and the rule of law, incentivizing growth and job creation, enhancing welfare." Mr. Speaker, when the 2021 budget came knocking on Parliament's door, a number of things were made clear from the 2020 budget. One, the PPP's concern about unemployment did not extend to the over 1,000 persons they dismissed over the last 16 months. The PPP's concern for the welfare of the citizens did not extend to those who now either no longer receive public assistance or are being blackmailed by the staff to give a percentage of what they are receiving or get their names pulled from receiving public assistance in the future. 3, the PPP does not know how to protect our people in a COVID-19 environment. 4, their governance structure is autocratic and everything they are engaged in is turbid, unconstitutional, and antithetical to good governance. 5, the PPP's plan for prosperity was for themselves and cronies. That the US Embassy here in Guyana was forced to speak to the issue of rule of law in relation to how the PPP has operated since returning to office, stating that, and I quote, "Unique must be seen as an indication of how far the PPP is from what can be considered transparent, accountable, equitable, and ensuring due process." Mr. Speaker, then we moved on to the 2021 budget, which promised a path to recovery, economic dynamism, and resilience. By the end of 2021, everyone asked, what did the PPP recover us from? From all appearances, we are in a worse state than we were in 2020. And by the end of their term in office, we will still be in recovery mode. Mr. Speaker, people questioned whether those on the other side understood the meaning of dynamism. Economic dynamism is a concept that must be understood first in its wider context. The term economic dynamism refers to the rate and direction of change in an economy. It traditionally encompasses activities like the rate of new businesses formation, the frequency of labor market turnover, and the geographic mobility of the workforce. It basically allows for a process termed creative destruction, where businesses enter the marketplace and expand, or they leave the marketplace, contract and leave the marketplace. Now, if this is done strictly based on the supply and demand of the consumer, then it would be difficult to fight. The reality is, however, governments are usually the largest consumer of goods and services in any economy. Small, medium, and large companies rely on contracts from the government to remain viable. Mr. Speaker, in our context, when a government has been as authoritarian as the PPP and thrives on driving fear into Guyanese, the government becomes a so-called invisible hand in our economy, determining the levels of dynamism we see. What does this mean? Many companies entering and leaving the market here in Guyana do so on the sole premise of whether they can gain contracts from the government. In the end, the economy has been dynamic, negatively affecting any one group or company that may be deemed not a friend of the PPP, and positively affecting those that are friends and families of the PPP. Mr. Speaker, now they have saddled us with this latest budget, titled Steadfast Against All Challenges, Resolute in Building Our One Guyana, with a non-oil budget of $426 billion, $6 billion less than last year when you add the 4 supplementals to the 383 they initially presented in March of 2021. Mr. Speaker, this PPP regime has given away so many tax concessions to their cronies and borrowed so much that our current non-oil budget is $6 billion less than it was last year. Now it becomes clear why they rushed to pass an assent to the Natural Resource Fund Bill of 2021, which the majority of Guyanese believe was illegally passed in the National Assembly. Mr. Speaker, to sit and boast about the largest budget ever, when a large section of the population is left to suffer due to your poor attempt at governance, not your, Mr. Speaker, but the PPP, your incompetence, your mediocre attempt at policy formation, and your inability to create and sell to the Guyanese people a vision that we can all agree to and work towards is ludicrous. Mr. Speaker, while they come here and boast about the largest budget, the Guyanese people have to endure inflation, high cost of living, high youth unemployment, extrajudicial killings, blackouts, load shedding, blackouts, load shedding, plenty more blackouts, and lots of load shedding. Then, Mr. Speaker, there is no water, low water, or if you are lucky to get water, it's gray water, brown water, or reddish water like the new $2,000 bill. Mr. Speaker, those are the challenges. And frankly speaking, they're all man-made challenges created by a group of people who are not allowed to think for themselves, but follow the instruction of one man, whose scope is limited to corruption, nepotism, racism, bullyism, and narcissism. This cabal has no idea what they're doing. They lack the intellectual capacity and foresight to effectively prepare the economy for the monies available to us through the Natural Resource Fund. Mr. Speaker, as far as the members on this side of the House are concerned, the NRF 2020 of 2021 was not legally passed. But what is even more worrying is that the PPP who rushed that bill through are content not to abide by sections of it. Section 16.2 states quite clearly that all withdrawals from the fund shall be deposited into the consolidated fund and shall be used only to finance national development priorities, including any initiative aimed at realizing an inclusive green economy, and essential projects that are directly related to ameliorating the effects of a major natural disaster. Mr. Speaker, this section expects any government to clearly identify the national development priorities that require the resources of the fund. Instead, what we are seeing in this budget is a line item under Table 2A and 2B and Table 4, which show that the full $126 billion will be withdrawn from the fund. This is unacceptable and must be corrected. Nowhere in the NRF Act that we believe is illegal is there any word like consultation. Not one word that suggests that the Guyanese people should be consulted on anything to do with how the fund will operate and the monies allocated. This to me should be seen as a major red flag. Why would you negate any form of consultative process with the stakeholders? Mr. Speaker, just a few days ago, I had a dream. And in this dream, Mr. Speaker, there were 65 members sitting in the National Assembly. There was a handsome gentleman sitting in the chair of the Speaker. In this dream, Mr. Speaker, the members on the government side brought a bill before the Assembly, a bill resembling all things corrupt and lacking transparency and accountability. The members of the opposition side, at the behest of their constituents and other right-minded groups and citizens, sought to have the bill sent to a select committee to facilitate consultation with a wide range of stakeholders. One thing led to the other, and the Assembly was out of control. Mr. Speaker, you see, my little understanding of how a Speaker operates suggests to me that whenever the Speaker recognizes that he is not in control of the House, he should adjourn the sitting and seek to speak to both the government and opposition to determine an amicable way forward. But this Speaker in my dream was adamant to carry on with the business of his paymasters. So amidst the noise and confusion, I saw this Speaker holding on to dear life to a replica mace and presiding over the Assembly where all members were in defiance of his authority. But Mr. Speaker, he didn't care as long as his paymasters got what they wanted and they were happy. His actions, Mr. Speaker, gave a lot of credence to the view that he does not attempt to pretend to be unbiased. But then again, Mr. Speaker.
Honorable member?
Yes, sir.
I think you had a premonition and not a dream.
It was.
So you move on from that and come back to the
Mr. Speaker, I'm almost finished with
or else, right? You had a premonition.
No, Mr. Speaker, it was a dream.
And it played out. It played out. So
I can't
continue, please.
Thank you.
Not on this line, though.
But then again, Mr. Speaker, in my dream, it was mentioned that he was on the government list of candidates for the elections. And that particular government does not allow for any among their rank to even pretend to be independent. So I guess the opposition members should not expect much from that Speaker. Mr. Speaker, in that dream, it became very evident that in that august House, they reached the nadir of all things transparent and accountable. For those of us who may or may not know, nadir means the lowest point, a time of great depression. So, Mr. Speaker, it is probably fitting in the most facetious way that—
I can give you some other definitions of nadir also. If you are an ardent space fan, when you have the zenith, the star way above you, the opposite side is nadir. But in Arabic, I point you to check that out, right? Very esteemed person.
Okay, sir.
And
this was a dream.
and I am a Muslim, and my name derives from Arabic.
So, Mrs.
And I want to again urge you move on from your dreams. Okay.
So, Mr. Speaker, it is probably fitting in the most facetious way that we find ourselves here today with an installed regime, a travesty of a 22 budget, and 16 months of a National Assembly being presided over by Speaker of the House, the Honorable Manzoor Nadir. Mr. Speaker, as the person responsible for shadowing the Public Service Minister, I must say that I am utterly dumbfounded and at a loss of words to describe how farcical it is of this administration to bring its third budget to this House with little to no focus on developing or improving the public sector. Reading the entire budget speech, Mr. Speaker, there was one mention of public service. And that only one mention was of what you did last year, which was already unacceptable. Mr. Speaker, I am standing here wondering if the minister, well, if the Public Service Ministry is a shell ministry, or is it that the administration has no faith in the Honorable Minister? Mr. Speaker, the Education Ministry has seemingly hijacked the Gold Project, which was the only noticeable work of the Public Service Ministry was involved in. At this juncture, I am perplexed as to what the Honorable Minister and her ministry has been doing, or according to this budget, is planning to do for 2022. I await her presentation so that she can not only inform me, but this nation of what exactly she has been doing as the Minister of the Public Service over the last 16 months, and what she intends to do besides the Gold Program. Mr. Speaker, the Honorable Member, Mr. Speaker, as you're on the Gold Project, which is most likely what the Minister will spend most of her time speaking about, outside of probably what happened during the recount and my scholarship and who I did or did not give scholarships to, there are a number of things I believe should be highlighted. While the issuing of scholarships are an important part of the responsibilities of the Minister of the Public Service, it is placed under the care of this particular ministry because it is expected that these scholars, once they have completed their programs, would enter the public service utilizing their new skills and knowledge to further professionalize said public service. Mr. Speaker, this is not so for the Gold recipients, as Gold recipients are not bound to work in the public service. Thus, even public servants who are Gold scholarship recipients can choose after completing their program to leave the public service. Why then is the Minister of Public Service spending so much of her time marketing a program that is likely to have very little impact on the public service? Mr. Speaker, another question that must be answered is, will there be any database in place to ensure that scholarship recipients have first access to vacancies, whether in the public or private sector, or will our scholarship recipients be left to figure it all out on their own? There are already major complaints about the Gold scholarships, as no assistance is given to recipients of these scholarships who do not have consistent and constant access to the internet. For those of us who are not aware, the majority, if not all, of the scholarships are to institutions overseas who are not aware of and are not interested in our deficiencies here, where blackouts and the internet are concerned. The onus thus lies in the Ministry of Public Service and the Ministry of Education to ensure that recipients are able to successfully complete their programs. This alone brings us to another point. What really is the success rate of those who receive scholarships? It is all good to boast about 5,000 or 6,000 persons that received Gold scholarships. There is no serious human resource plan and program for our country that would ensure that our unemployment numbers reduce significantly. As I am sure I have said before, scholarships are good, but if not properly planned and targeted, we will continue to have persons with a myriad of certificates who cannot find proper employment, and that should not be our aim at this juncture of our development. Mr. Speaker, the 2016 Commission of Inquiry into the Public Service generated a comprehensive list of recommendations for the reform of the public sector that will require time to fully implement. It is urgent that the Minister of the Public Service initiate actions to promote and enforce a depoliticized, meritocratic, efficient, and citizen-oriented service through public service regulations and codes of conduct, performance management, and rationalized, fair, and consistent pay structures associated with written job descriptions. I do hope that the Minister of the Public Service has plans in place to properly develop all aspects of the public service. This grand, lofty budget that the PPP believes is best for Guyana requires capable and efficient public servants who have the requisite resources to properly implement the programs that the government wants implemented. It is inhumane for this administration to expect that the public servants must continuously work and implement the policies of this administration with a sense of ownership and alacrity if they do not feel that they are also benefiting from it. Mr. Speaker, much has been said about the fact that there is not much in the budget for public servants. Inflation has not only swallowed up whatever tax threshold increases being touted, but the 7% increase and the bonuses that persons received last year has also been swallowed up. The public servant who is earning minimum wage received a monthly salary increase of a mere $4,900, while the president who is earning $2 million plus will be receiving a $150,000 increase. Worse still, is this that the minimum wage earners must pay taxes on their salary increase, which they did, while the president will not. This stark contradiction highlights the major difference between the APNU plus AFC coalition and the PPP. The coalition government consistently ensured that senior public servants were awarded a lower percentage increase than junior public servants, thereby ensuring that the income gap would reduce over time. The PPP's single rate across the board increase is intended to widen the gap between those who have much and those who have little. In a time when world over, emphasis is being placed on equity, the president chose to reward himself and minister with a 7% increase amounted to $150,000 tax-free for himself, $120,000 tax-free for the AG and Prime Minister, and $60,000 for other ministers, knowing very well that the public servants who work for minimum wage will be taking home an increase of $3,528 Guyana dollars after tax. $3,528 after tax, Honorable Sonia Paral. That cannot even buy a bottle of cooking gas, Honorable Member Sonia Paral. In comparison, consider the following. After just 18 months in office from July 1st, 2015 to January 1st, 2017, the APNU plus AFC increased the minimum wage by over 50%, increased the income tax threshold by 20%, reduced the marginal income tax rate to 28%, and removed the tax from employees' contribution to the NIS. In addition, old age pension increased by 45% and public assistance by 27%. All of this without utilizing $1 in oil revenues. Mr. Speaker, the age-old problem of persons entering the public service being told that they have to wait 3 to 6 months before receiving their first paycheck has to come to an end. Even though it may not seem to be important enough for the National Assembly to accept the motion for whatever reason, Mr. Speaker, other public servants too, who are scholarship recipients, have complained about being forced to sign documents relieving the government from its contractual obligations to students who were on scholarship and expected to serve their country as a public servant. This too must stop. Mr. Speaker, this then brings me to another important point. The Ministry of the Public Service portfolio includes the management of the human resources in our public service. All indications from August 2020 to now suggest that the professionals in many of our public sector offices are leaving the job or are being asked to leave. Persons willing to do the biddings of those in charge are being promoted. Public servants are anxious and unsure of what will happen next. The gains made in the public service between 2015 to 2020 have now regressed significantly across our public service, and the Minister of the Public Service has remained silent. One major public service department that I believe requires highlighting due to their current inability to adequately do the work that is required is the Environmental Protection Agency. The EPA, Mr. Speaker, was created in 1996 by the PPC. The state of the agency inherited by the coalition can be described as follows. And this is description by the staff then. The staff of the agency described the EPA as low morale, dysfunctional, a toothless tiger, disrespected by all, place to dwell until he can do better, and humiliating with politicians overruling decisions. There was extremely high turnover of staff. There was only one EPA office in Georgetown to serve the entire country. There was grave human capacity deficit to execute the legislative mandate of the agency. A 2015 forensic audit determined that 262 staff were needed, but the agency was trying to accomplish its task with a staff of only 95. And this number did not include the need for staff focusing on oil and gas. There were no engineers and very few scientists in the agency. A system of record keeping, control, and secure custody of critically important legal documents, such as permits, contracts, and files, were non-existent. Mr. Speaker, the coalition found the existence of 2,100 permits with over 500 expired permits, some over 15 years expiration, plus a large number of unexpired permits that were issued in error, and facilities constructed and operating without permits. Near zero opportunity for training, exposure to international technical conferences, and membership in internationally recognized professional associations. The Environmental Protection Agency did not have its own certified laboratory. It had limited up-to-date measurement equipment and modeling tools to measure and analyze contaminants in the environment. There were only two roadworthy vehicles, which were far from adequate to conduct field inspections necessary for compliance monitoring for the entire country. There were no penalties or fines ever imposed despite hundreds of violations. The EPA transferred its environmental oversight of mining to the GGMC, which was a clear conflict of interest with the GGMC overseeing its own operations and EPA dishing its legislative mandate. Permit applications took years to process. Except for the Higgs-Bosch landfill, which is in itself questionable as to its engineering integrity, all other garbage and waste disposed of in uncontrolled dump sites seriously affected surface and groundwater, air quality, fire hazards, and breeding rodents, mosquitoes, and diseases. Mr. Speaker, this is what the coalition found. This is the PPP's record on the environment. This is how the PPP treated the entire public service, with scant regard. No matter what they attempt to say, as the Honorable Minister said yesterday, the facts speak for themselves. However, Mr. Speaker, the APNUFC came to government 19 years after the establishment of the EPA, and under the guidance of Dr. Vince Adams, there were significant transformational changes at the EPA, which included the following. 1, 2 additional offices were opened at Wim and Linden, with plans in place for an office in all regions by 2021. 2, the MOU with the GGMC was cancelled, thus returning mandated regulatory oversight of mining to the EPA, and which terminated the disturbing conflict of interest situation with the GGMC overseeing its own mining operations. 3, the APNU-AFC began aggressive capacity building and career development of employees to cope with exponential increase in workload, with quadrupling of the economy in 4 years. 4, paid study leave, summer internship programs, international networking, such as exposing staff to international conferences, meetings, and memberships in professional organizations. The number of training, conferences, and staff participants were doubled in 1 year, from 88 to 161 and 160 to 223, respectively. We recruited 20 highly qualified staff and attorneys, including first five engineers. We partnered with the World Bank to design an EPA oil and gas unit consisting of 34 highly skilled staff to oversee the petroleum industry, including 24/7 on-site presence. We revised the EPA Act, environmental legislations, standards and guides as high priority to make current the rapid changes driven by the oil and gas production that was not considered in the 25-year-old Act. We hired an attorney dedicated to that task. We made Guyana the 10th member of the International Offshore Petroleum Environmental Regulators, including membership on the Oil Spill Working Group. We elevated Guyana to the forefront of international leaders in the groundbreaking environmental technology of environmental DNA. As testimony to EPA's impressive show of leadership, Guyana was chosen to host the 2021 International Workshop on this subject, but was hampered by COVID. We established a Coastal Marine Management Committee in 2018 to coordinate the management of our coastal and marine resources. the first document control center with modern filing room and state-of-art electronic database and file management system constituted over 2,100 project files, thus alleviating a chaotic and unstructured system for records management and secure custody of important documents, including legal documents such as permits and contracts, was built.
Before you continue to tell us how much you did, you need an extension, honorable member.
Comrade Speaker, I move for the honorable member to be given 5 minutes to conclude her presentation.
Thank you, honorable member. You may continue to conclude in 5 minutes.
We brought all 500 expired permits and most other violations into compliance and worked with others to establish compliance schedules as necessary. We recovered 140 million in otherwise lost revenues by bringing violators into compliance, while at the same time quadrupled annual revenues from 50 million in 2015 to 200 million in 2019. Without any additional funding from the Treasury, Dr. Vince Adams and staff used self-generated, recovered, and newly increased revenues to increase the vehicle fleet from 2 to 10, thus substantially boosting field monitoring to maintain compliance, which was severely lacking and responsible for the numerous expired permits, and to recruit 20 highly skilled scientists and engineers that were almost non-existent. For the first time, we developed a board-approved plan for full self-funding of EPA by 2023. For the first time, the EPA took necessary actions in accordance with the rule of law to impose fines for very serious violations of the laws and threats to the environment, safety, and health of the nation, including proceeding with prosecution of Exxon for refusing to pay a paltry fine for one such persistent violation. We initiated plans for EPA's own certified laboratory to conduct more complex analysis over and above preliminary data from field equipment. Labs will soon pay for itself. We took on the much avoided daunting challenge of finally solving the decades-old waste disposal problem, including nationwide garbage dumping in environmentally sensitive areas. This is what took place not only in the EPA, but other public agencies who finally had the space to breathe, to become professional, and to do their work without political overreach. This is what the APNU AFC government did during its tenure, and of this we can be proud. But Mr. Speaker, the PPP is back. Mr. Speaker, the PPP is back. And what has happened in the EPA since August 2020 is nothing short of a travesty. Mr. Speaker, the current PPC government in just one short year alone has embarked on a massive tearing down of the institutional pillars that were built by the Coalition for Sound Environmental Protection. Such cruel destruction of the extraordinary transformation achieved by the Coalition in its short 4 years may only be explained as political expediency without care for the nation's environmental safety and well-being. These unconscionable actions include returning the same leadership personnel that ran the EPA into the ground, destroying morale of and having chilling effect on high-performing staff by executing discriminatory terminations, demotions, and negation of contracts, despite agencies' limited capacity, returning the agency to a state of mistrust and disrespect from the public and business community, and politicizing the agency. Wholesale interference from politicians who routinely pressure EPA staff to issue permits to friends and acquaintances and overturn major decisions made by EPA technical personnel. For example, Mr. Speaker, the EPA published that the Demerara River Bridge required an EIA, only to be forced to reverse that decision. It now seems to be the order of the day not to have EIAs for projects which the EPA would normally be deemed to have an EIA. The PPP dropped the court case against Exxon and retaliated against the attorney prosecuting the case, even though he happens to be an employee of the highest caliber performance. The PPP...
Time to conclude, time to conclude.
So, Mr. Speaker, as I conclude, when my colleagues on this side of the House speak to the fact that the PPP is not truly interested in real development, this is what we mean. When my colleagues and I are skeptical about whether we can trust PPP to effectively and efficiently deal with power and authority, what we just heard from the EPA informs us. We on this side of the House understand that the PPP has no interest in the poor, no interest in the working class, no interest in true development, and no interest in the environment. The budget shows us all who care to see that their interest is in extending even further than they have already done, their hands and our collective money to their cronies. And so, Mr. Speaker, I, Tabitha Sarah Bahali, will not and cannot support this travesty of a budget. I thank you.
Thank you, honorable member. Thank you for the dream and thank you for the presentation. The Honorable Minister of the Public Service, the Honorable Sonia Parag. It's now your turn to make your contribution.